Welcome to Tech Talks, the first word in insurance, a podcast by Hyper Exponential. Hi, I'm Tom Chamberlain, VP of Customer Consulting at Hyper Exponential, and your host, otherwise known as Tech. I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Tech Talks. In this episode, we're talking to Michael Brunero, who's Head of Tech, Media and IP at CFC Underwriting. So let's get straight into it. To kick us off, Michael, it'd be great to get into what tech, media and IP are actually all about. I mean, a lot of insurance classes, property, motor, marine, aviation, they're kind of relatively easy to understand as insurance groups, probably much less so with those things and in particular sort of intangible assets. So let's kick off by, could you give me an overview of what these things actually are?
Yeah, well, I guess for me and what I do in that world is I basically provide insurance for businesses that are in the emerging tech space, for example, whether they're providing AI, Internet of Things, blockchain services, to the world of digital media, podcasters, influencers, experiential marketing, and then all the way down to intellectual property insurance, so protecting people's intangible assets and creative endeavors for all types of businesses. So the way I like to kind of pull it all together is say my department and what we do really is about ensuring the innovators and creatives of the world, trying to find solutions for people that are generating something new. When it comes to intangible assets, that's a huge part of what we do. Because that's essentially what our clients are creating and what they're doing. You know, what are intangible assets? Really, it's anything you can't touch. I don't know about you, but personally, I've got a lot more in my cloud storage than I do in my attic. That is the way of the world now. We have a lot more data than we do stuff. And so it's about making sure there's solutions for people's intangible assets. So obviously cyber insurance is one that people are probably most familiar with around the protection of people's data. I think, we always insure our laptops, the table that my laptop's sitting on, but far more valuable to my company than my laptop is what is actually on my laptop. And they're the kind of intangible assets, all the way down to intellectual property. These days that is the core of a business. If you're a software company, and someone alleged that you had actually stolen their idea, that would potentially render your entire business completely useless if you were no longer able to use that piece of software. So I think these are really the key core areas to businesses right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of tricky one. I was going to use the word intangible then. That's rather silly, but it's hard. It's hard to put your finger on it because with sort of property insurance, you've got a building, right? You know how much it's worth. You get it valued, and you can insure it for that much. Same as you said, your laptop, your table. But I mean, how much is your IP actually worth? How do you go about sort of understanding what is my piece of software here? What is this sort of unique thing that I have, and how do you value it? Is it just a case of, well, I value it at this, and please insure it for that much? Well, what's the thought process there?
Well, that's the difficulty with IP. You only truly know the value of what IP is worth when you try to sell it. And then it's, who's willing to pay for it. So it's an incredibly difficult task to value IP. The flip side of that is, as an industry, these are the challenges that we're going to have to eventually solve, or risk becoming redundant to our customers. So yes, there's no actual tried and tested measure. There are, different types of IP asset valuers out there. But again, it's always a point in time valuation. What a piece of IP now might be actually very different in value to what it is in 5 years' time. So even that point in time is really important. But, what we can do is still protect businesses, not necessarily for the value of the IP per se, but we can protect businesses against the threat of IP litigation. And I think that is important. I think we need to move down a journey of valuing IP and how we go there. But there's still so much value in IP protection over people's individual, designs, for example, or processes. We often think of IP, for example, as being products, but there's so much more to it than that. Even a process can be IP. For example, if you're a manufacturing firm, you might have a process that gives you a competitive edge because you can return goods to market faster and at greater capacity. And that then in of itself, that process is really valuable. I always use an example of one of my friends when I was back in Australia, and she was really up and coming in fashion. She'd won multiple awards. They'd sent her to Milan, and she decided she was going to get into the swimwear industry. She made these beautiful swimwear designs, and then went to an extremely well-known fashion house, a swimwear label, and they said, "Sorry, we're not interested." Only for a very short time later to find her designs on a rack with their label on it.
No.
Yeah, so they absolutely took her designs, and she's just one person. And basically said, "What do I do? I can't do anything with it. I'm just powerless. I don't have lawyers." And they're the kind of risks that we're starting to really see, because people do feel powerless, and they've spent a lot of time and effort. You know, she had to come up with an entire new line of swimwear because hers was redundant, and they're the sort of businesses we're looking to kind of help work for, whether they're creative and creating something special or unique. We have a product that actually protects those little guys and actually allows them to pursue bigger parties for doing things like that. So not just defending them, actually going against it. And you'd be surprised how effective a strongly worded letter from a reputable IP lawyer with an insurance company behind them can be for a small business. It can work out really well. Often what tends to happen is they don't often like pull the swimwear, for example. What they'll do is agree to pay get a license agreement in place and pay fees for the use of their designs. So you can see some really, really great outcomes for small businesses, for all types of businesses. But I think I'm very interested in kind of how we can protect the little guy along the way.
That's really interesting, because I kind of almost thought to sort of have yourself protected, you're going to need to patent stuff, you're going to trademark things. Is that the case, or can you get this? It's basically, if you can show it's your design in the example you gave there. Do you need to have registered all this, or is that no? I can prove that here my drawings, here the design, and you have stolen my ideas.
Exactly. I think, copyright exists at the time you produce something. In terms of like developing song lyrics, for example. So if you can prove the design, you don't necessarily have to trademark anything. If you can prove that at the point in time it's yours, then your IP exists in that because that was your creative endeavor. People still need to protect that, but there is a lot that goes on in the tech industry, in the fashion industry, where there's a lot of kind of questionable kind of activity, and I think large businesses particularly think they can get away with it. They often use IP litigation goes the other way too. They'll often, bigger companies will often try and sue smaller companies in order to cripple them or buy them. So it's usually used as a competitive tactic as well. We've seen that time and time again.
I mean, I guess the claims can get quite chunky if you're sort of talking litigation. Is kind of legal expenses, did you get sort of full on cover for that? Because I'm now imagining some sort of dramatized court case where this is sort of strung out over months with lots and lots of lawyers involved and things. Does it get as crazy as that, or I've been watching too many films?
It can.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it absolutely can. It really depends on who the litigants are in the case. There's a lot of cross claims. I think, if you'll often find, for example, a trademark dispute. If you've got a trademark dispute going on between a US company, as soon as that claim comes in, you're spending $1 million on defense costs, for example. That's just straight out the gate. And that's usually just to get it to a settlement state. But even if you look to the press, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, it was been going on for some time, the huge IP action between Tinder and Bumble.
Yes, right.
Tinder, the big dating app. Yeah, it was. It basically wanted to acquire Bumble, and there was some internal machinations going on there between the two CEOs. They tried to acquire it. Bumble wouldn't sell, due to some of those, personal conflicts amongst other things. But basically, they wouldn't sell. So Tinder came through with a whole swathe of IP litigation. You've stole this function, this function, this function. That looks a lot like us, and that was what it was designed to do, to cripple them. And that's been going on for years and years and years. And they're those big ticket, very well known brand visible claims that are definitely out there. And those ones can trickle on for quite some time.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like then there's some real punchy kind of claims going out there.
Yeah, I think yeah, everyone tries to get that market share. I often say, it's really interesting working in the role I have because we get to see technology businesses come in from all over the world. So we work globally from London. So we'll see a risk from Australia, the UK, Canada, the US, Israel, coming in from all over the place. And what tends to happen is it tends to be quite cyclical. So tech goes through massive fads and phases, as you probably know. 1 minute we're talking about NFTs, then it's the metaverse, then all of a sudden it's AI. And what often tends to happen is you'll get an idea. So at one point, everyone was a social media site. And then you kind of see that bubble up and market share tends to get dominated by a couple. We've seen it with search engines, the dating apps, most of them are owned by Match Group. Delivery services, you tend to find there's tons and hustle and bustle until the one or two or three tend to take overall market share. And that's when things get really hot in the space. Because it's a climb, knowing I think that at the end of the day, there's not going to be tons of places for people. It's interesting. I used to see dating websites every day about 5 years ago. Now the ones I see are very, very niche, like single Australians in London, things like that. So yeah, the big ones tend to be taken.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I think you're right. You mentioned a couple of things there which were sort of hot topics, like NFTs. You and I were talking about some time ago, and I don't know. Maybe I'm not looking in the right areas, but they just seem to have just completely disappeared. Was that literally just
Absolutely.
a passing fad then? Okay.
100%. I think what we saw with NFTs was a lot of tulip mania, right? If you look at the core of why they were developed, it was really just to give creatives, people that were developing digital art, a way to kind of monetize off that, which is a completely feasible reason for people to earn money. That anyone can copy and paste anything from the internet. So being able to way to monetize that for people who are exerting creative effort, great. Unfortunately, the tech industry got involved in it. I'm like, how can we make this happen? And then all of a sudden, people are buying Bored Apes for millions of dollars. And I think it went up and down quite quick. What'll be interesting, I think, will be what they end up having use for, because the idea of digital ownership to me makes complete sense. So if they might go away and come back in a way that's actually quite functional, or even how we apply NFTs to real life assets and tracking real life assets. So it'll be interesting to see what evolution it goes through. But I think the idea of NFTs as being really valuable pieces of digital art seems to have kind of trickled down a little bit. Whereas the world of cryptocurrency has been up, down, and around, but it hasn't gone away. It's always been sitting there. I think, digital currencies are here to stay. The UK is finally regulating it. So I think that kind of world is probably got a lot more value that's actually starting to trickle into to kind of more of a broad brush rather than just being a passing fad.
Right, yeah, and I mean this must make underwriting incredibly difficult for basically emerging tech, right? Because you've got these new things, you're not quite sure what the value is going to be or how they're going to be used. This must be. I mean, there's not too much new stuff goes on in other lines of business. Occasionally a new aircraft comes out and they have a look at it and go, it's probably much the same as the previous aircraft, just with a few more bells and whistles. But for emerging tech, how on earth do you kind of go about understanding what the risk actually is and what needs to be insured and how much for? That must be a nightmare.
Yeah, it's one of the things that gets me up and going all the time, though. A lot of what we do is liability insurance, so it's who's suing who. Like when I was doing property insurance, we do a little bit of it. I just looked at the Three Little Pigs. That was my underwriting. I'm like, this isn't for me. What's it made of? Cool. I am much more interested by who's suing who and how. I think what you find with tech is tech doesn't really come with some big bang of evolution. You're like, oh my God, where did that come from? It's usually an evolution of already existing tech. I mean, if you look at ChatGPT, generative AI has completely blown to a new level right now, but we've been writing chatbots, much more simplistic AI for some time. So it's not like we haven't seen any of it before. So we're kind of able to use a lot of the same principles to our underwriting. It just gets more complex as the tech gets more complex. And that's really about, how is the legislation, how is regulation going to respond to this? Because they don't always complement each other. A lot of the law, for example, around IP never contemplated AI. So trying to mash the two together sometimes produces some very unexpected and unintended outcomes. But it doesn't mean that we just turn off and say, well, this is too hard because we don't know. Because again, we need to be relevant to emerging industries. It's not like we haven't been here before. Once upon a time, we were the first insurer to come out with a policy form specifically designed for social media companies and the social media revolution. We were seeing user-generated content for the first time, and people are like, well, what's going to happen? Who's responsible for this? We've got defamation issues. If I've got a person posting on my platform about a third party, is that me that's responsible? And the laws that were developed around that kind of had to work with this very new world. And we take measured risk, and that's what it's all about. It's about dipping in, having a book that and are comfortable with that allows you to then explore new areas. But yeah, I think you can learn from the past, but you also I'm always very surprised by what we see. One of the things I learned when I came to London, I started doing UK business, is you might think how legislation's going to apply. Then you deal with a US litigant and they don't care. They're going to sue you anyway. So then you've got defense costs kind of trickling from the first point. So it doesn't matter if you're right. At that point, you're paying straight out the door anyway. So you kind of can throw some of that out the window and kind of just learn a little from how different like territories and operate, for example. But it's never black and white.
Yeah.
But, I guess it's interesting
That's the thing,
with the AI side of things, because it feels like, regulators are already very much hot on the topic with AI. I don't think I've ever seen them react quite so quickly to something, which is probably a case in point.
But are they? See, this is the funny thing, right? It feels like the sort of it's out there now. The cat's out of the bag. We can't really put it back in, and now generative AI is everywhere. We can get like straight onto it. Well, I could look up right now, or Bard, ChatGPT, other generative AIs available, I think, but they're now talking about, should we pause this? Should we think about how we regulate this? Should we think about how we actually manage this? Because there are some inherent risks in using it, but it feels a little bit too late. Maybe that's just how regulation works, right? It comes in a little bit after the fact, and then they go, boy, perhaps we should be looking at this in a structured way. But do you think it's too late for that, or is there still time to make this to help around this area?
Yeah, I look better late than never for me. Like I said, cryptocurrency's been around a lot longer than kind of the generative AI that we're seeing now, and it's only just starting to get regulation. I think as an insurer, we are often expected to kind of be there for these risks before we know exactly how the world's going to look and how it's going to react. So from my perspective, regulation's better coming at some point. And businesses then have to also I guess assess their business to changing regulations. So I think it's always the way. We're never going to have regulation and come before the technology, because that's, dare I say, impossible. It's kind of, the chicken before the egg style situation. But I think particularly with AI, I think, there's a justifiable concern, I think, with AI. I think there is some real concerns about how it could be applied, from, a moral and an ethical issue down to, issues of ownership, who actually owns that data. So I think it does need to happen, and it would definitely give me a lot more comfort. But it's still an area that we're massively interested in, that we've been, underwriting businesses in for quite some time. But definitely feels like on this scale up, it's an area I'd be very keen to see how they balance that too. That idea of, encouraging innovation. There's some great efficiencies and there's some great stuff that can come from AI. I hate admin. I am terrible. Ever since my days as a lawyer, my files were a mess. So if it can take any of my admin off my table, hey, go for it. And we try to do that at work, and kind of, how we, log submissions up to the system so that it's not a human doing it. But balancing that with some of those moral and ethical issues, I think, is going to be an interesting challenge. It's never so easy to draw a line.
it's interesting. Again, we've been looking at different use cases of this internally, trying to figure out, okay, what is the best, what are some really good use cases? And again, being very sensitive to the fact that you can't put any sort of IP into it because it's not protected. So it's a very difficult thing to try and do. When sort of proper search engines were coming about, right, we were taught very carefully to say, right, when you're using Google, then don't just take the first thing that pops up as the answer, and that's de facto the point. Like, you need to go away and sort of have a look at multiple sources, check your facts, and come back to it. With ChatGPT, you get into a situation where you can ask it a question and it will give you what sounds like an incredibly credible answer. It may be utter rubbish, but you just don't know. And this is the problem, right? Because it's such a low bar to entry now for this, that you can think you're coming across and think you're understanding and learning things in a certain way, but actually you're just perpetuating a bunch of stuff which is incorrect on the internet, and that's actually a real danger of it. And having to apply that sort of that level of intellect above it, which is like, okay, does this really make sense? Where you're using it as an expert in a field and using it to sort of hone down even more into what you're doing, then it's really useful, because you're going to have that level of grounders to go, I don't know, what it's coming up with now is just utter rubbish. Or it's like, no, that's actually, that aligns with the sort of current understanding, and here's a few nuances. If it's something that's well documented on the internet, then for sure it's going to be much better to do. If you ask it to define what a generalized linear model is, there's relatively little ambiguity, and it could probably tell you that. If you want to ask it sort of more opinion-based stuff, then you've got to be incredibly careful, and it will give some interesting answers. But and actually, just going to touch on a point you mentioned around the sort of social media platforms and how things can be sort of propagated on there. I mean, AI and stuff can really sort of be used for this. So fake news, this was a huge thing. It has been a huge thing. Still, probably is going to be even more of a huge thing. It's actually quite terrifying now how realistic things can appear, videos and whatever else. But this is a problem still for social media, for fake news and what's put on the platform and how it's propagated. That's something as well that's insurable against, right? And is a proper concern.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those areas around where how much responsibility does the platform have for fake news, for misinformation? And it's still something around the world, different regulators grappling to say, well, where is that line drawn? How much responsibility do you have to take it down? And how much kind of responsibility does it lie? Should you be doing it as soon as it's up? What identification? Doesn't matter in terms of how big you are, in terms of how many users you've got. And I definitely think that's still something that's a big concern for anyone on those platforms. It's not so easy, especially when you're getting the other side of it. Not just individuals like you and I putting things on there. Not that I propagate false information, but state-based attacks, which are highly technical led. It's complex, and again, I find it. When people talk to me about regulating AI and how we're going to do it, I'm like, well, we haven't even solved some of the old problems, so I don't imagine it's going to be overnight. I think the pace with which technology moves. Then you have to compare that with the pace at which legislation and regulation moves, and we're just in different stratospheres at that point. But again, I think it's really important for the insurance industry to remain relevant, because if we don't, and we can't be an adequate risk transfer model, customers are going to find a way. They'll innovate in a different way. So I think we have to be innovative to remain relevant, and that is about addressing some of these unknowns. Evolving what we have, evolving our products. One of the things I've really loved about working at a business that's really pioneering in the cyberspace is how we've been able to create products for industries that have digitized, because the digital revolution has changed traditional sectors substantially, with healthcare going online, financial services being provided online, the amount of technology that now goes into manufacturing plants. It's completely changing these businesses. Technology is everywhere, and our products really need to start being aware of that, even in traditional sectors. As you would know, even how the world of aviation dealt with drones. It was like, oh, where do we go from here? That's going to continue to happen.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. And I'm just thinking now in terms of the sort of general market, again in other sort of more the lines we talked about, property, liability, marine aviation. It is very cyclical still as an insurance market, and it's going up and down. And right now, for quite a lot of lines of business, it's the hardest market they've ever seen, albeit slowly starting to soften. Is tech, media, and IP? Does that go through the same sort of cycles? I just wasn't sure, given the fact that it's always sort of evolving.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It definitely goes through market cycles as well. I think, tech's quite funny because it seems to straddle the world of cyber and PI, because it's a combined policy. So if the cyber market goes, it tends to follow that. But depends what the PI market's doing as well. But it typically follows the cyber market, so it's starting to soften. Media is a bit more niche. Media and IP are a little bit more niche. IP particularly is an incredibly small market. I don't think a lot of people know that product's out there and available. So it's not so subject to kind of market cycles. But definitely the tech side of things, media again, kind of fits a little bit in with the PI market. But yeah, I think we're definitely noticing a little bit of a softening in that space, as we kind of come, fall from those glory days of the cyber hard market.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and actually this leads me on to sort of my kind of last question really, which is around the soft market and what do you think insurers in general should be doing to prepare for what is probably and inevitably a soft market again? We kind of cross our fingers and hope it's not going to happen, but it feels like an inevitability. So what are your kind of thoughts on how we should be preparing?
Guess it depends how your loss ratios look. No, I would say I definitely think, and this is a big point in my team and my department, is we got to go back to service more than anything. If you've got a quality product, and you can provide quality service, you'll end up with quality results. I think it's important for insurers to partner with their brokers, work with them, and provide them a valid service. Then, things largely look after themselves from there. I think I find the insurance market so interesting, just and the concept of Lloyd's, where these underwriters who have the product have so much power over brokers. It's kind of like, hold on, I'm so used to doing it the other way. When someone's giving me business, how do I service that to the best of my capability? And I think that's where insurers really, particularly heading to that soft market cycle, need to focus attentions. It's really about giving the broker what they want, the timing that they need, so that they can supply that to their customer, because that's really what this is about at the end of the day. It's about servicing a customer's needs. And this is about, a lot bigger picture than just insurance. It's about, we kind of help the whole world move around. We've seen some of the most baby little tech companies that are now very, very well-known brands come through our doors as startups, which many of us have on our phone now. So I think we have a really, really important role to play. So I think service is a huge part of as we enter into this soft market to partner well with our brokers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And I think with things like IP insurance, which you kind of mentioned earlier as well, there's a real need in the market for it, and they're not necessarily being aware of it. And the first time that the customer is aware of it is when the horrible thing happens and their swimsuit line is stolen by a big brand, and you're in trouble. And then of course you insure it, but the damage is done. So I agree. There's a lot of education that the market still can be doing, and there's a lot of business out there which is still uninsured or inadequately insured, where we can sort of take advantage of. So soft market or hard market, I think you're right. I think we've got we're here to protect the customers, right? That's what insurance is all about, and making sure that they're getting exactly what they need. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Wonderful. All right, well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely wonderful to chat, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the call.
That concludes another episode of Tech Talks. If you enjoyed today's show and want to find out more about the topics discussed, head over to hyperexponential.com to gain access to a range of resources relating to this episode. The link is in the description, and of course, wherever you're listening to this podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave us a comment or review. Thanks so much for joining us, and see you next time. Bye!